Welcome back to the Psyche and Singularity series. So this chapter is comparing Carl Jung's near-death experience to Leonard Suskind's theory of holographic information conservation at the cosmic horizon. So this was the parallel that inspired me to write a dissertation about this topic and then transform it into a book, because the parallels between Jung's NDE, his near-death experience description, and Suskind's description of his holographic string theory are almost exact. It's the kind of mirror symmetry that Jung and Wolfgang Pauli said we should look for between psychology and physics, and there it was. It was the 4th of July, 2010. I was at my friend Mike Bellerin's house, and I was working on a paper, and the TV was on in the background, and Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman, an episode of that series was playing, and it was Leonard Susskind describing his theory. And he talked about how the three-dimensional universe that we experience is really an illusion, and that everything we experience here is being projected by these fundamental vibrating threads that stretch all the way out to the spherical horizon of the cosmos. And when I heard that, I immediately remembered Carl Jung's description of his near-death experience, which you can find in his book, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. It's his autobiography that he said, you have to wait until I die for it to be published. That was 1961, so that's important also because Gerard 't Hooft and Leonard Susskind developed their holographic string theory in the early 1990s. So Jung was not copying them, and it's unlikely that Susskind would be copying Carl Jung, considering Suskind's materialistic philosophy. So how do you account for this near-perfect parallel between these two descriptions? We've been going over Leonard Suskind's string theory in every one of these video series, and I've mentioned Jung's near-death experience a few times, but now we'll focus in on these very precise parallels. So I'll just read a little bit. I want to read verbatim from Jung because because I'm putting so much emphasis on the very detailed parallels. So here in 1944, so it was in March 1944, Jung broke his foot, then he had a heart attack, and that triggered this rising experience of his psyche rising out of his body, 1,000 miles above the earth. And, well, you know what, before I read the details, I'll just summarize. So he said he felt himself rise above the hospital in Switzerland, and he could see plainly visible the continents, the reddish-yellow deserts of Arabia, the global spherical shape of the Earth, and he felt like he was on the point of leaving Earth forever. And later he said it would have been 1,000 miles up in space in order for him to see what he had seen. And then he encountered a big hollowed-out black stone, like he had seen in the Gulf of Bengal. A big, huge boulder the size of his own house, hollowed out into a temple. And then inside the temple, he saw a black Hindu in a white robe sitting in a lotus posture, waiting for him. He said it seemed as if he was waiting for me. And then inside, deeper in the inner chamber of this hollowed out temple, he sensed the people to whom he belonged in reality, and that if he could only contact them, he would know everything that came before his life and would come after. So that is a rundown of what he saw here. Now I'm going to read a little bit of the details. So he said, approaching the temple gave him the feeling that, quote, the whole phantasmagoria of earthly existence fell away or was stripped from me, an extremely painful process. But then it was given all back to him simultaneously in a blissful way, so that he consisted of his own history, the past, the present, and the future of his own earthly biography he experienced simultaneously after it was painfully stripped away from him. And while he was feeling this severe attraction for this hollowed out black rock temple because he wanted to be with the people inside who he belonged to in reality and who would teach him all about his destiny, not only of this life, but his life, it seemed to him, was one segment of a chain that stretched infinitely to the past and the future. He wanted to get in there. He was about to enter the Black Rock Temple when what he called the primal form of his doctor, Dr. H, rose above the earth and called him back. And it was, I'll read this quote because he said he was delegated by the earth. So this is a quote from Carl Jung, that Dr. H had been delegated by the earth to deliver a message to me to tell me that there was a protest against my going away. I had no right to leave the earth and must return. So in the book, I speculate that why would Earth personified delegate the primal form of Jung's doctor to retrieve him back to the earth? So this was 1944. A year later, they started testing and using nuclear weapons. At the end of World War II, they dropped 2 of them. The United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, and before that, in New Mexico, they did the test of the first atomic explosion, at which the head physicist Robert Oppenheimer, who we've spoken of before, he was the first one to come up with the idea that if a star burns through its nuclear fuel, if it's a large enough star, gravity will overtake it and it will collapse into a singularity. He actually published that paper on the very first day of World War II, and then at the very last day of World War II, or at least the day of the testing of the atomic bomb, which ended World War II at the Trinity site in New Mexico, he quoted from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds," or time, destroyer of worlds. So I mention that in the book because Krishna, he's the ultimate black Hindu, and Jung encountered what he called the black Hindu who held the secrets to his whole life inside that hollowed out black hole temple, which I also compare to a black hole. It seems to be perhaps Jung's psychic interpretation of a black hole, in which case the black Hindu would represent the gravitational singularity, the archetypal self. So why would Earth pull Jung back? I speculate it was because of this near-death experience he had, that now we see how closely it mirrors Leonard Susskind's holographic string theory, and that I think is convincing scientific evidence for the existence of the self, the archetypal self, that each one of us is one with the central gravitational singularity and the encompassing horizon of the cosmos. And that if we can perceive ourselves that way, we'll identify ourselves with each other and with the environment of Earth, and that will be the antidote to the self-destructive, planet-destroying mentality that we have as being these material bodies who are not intimately united with all other living beings and, in fact, the universe itself, and more than that, every universe in the megaverse of universes and beyond. So that is my speculation, that this near-death experience that Jung recounts was the capstone to his entire psychology, and that his psychology, especially when we see it, the parallels with Susskind and 't Hoof's holographic string theory, that is what Earth needs humans to imbibe. We need to perceive the universe through the lens of that union of these two worldviews, which are seemingly opposite, but they're actually a perfect match. So the paragraph that I'm going to read now is really the most precise symmetry between Susskind's string theory and Jung. So after Dr. H brought Jung back, he said, "Disappointed, I thought, now I must return to the box system again. For it seemed to me as if behind the horizon of the cosmos, a three-dimensional world had been artificially built up in which each person sat by himself in a little box. And now I should have to convince myself all over again that this was important. Life in the whole world struck me as a prison, and it bothered me beyond measure that I should be finding all that quite in order. I had been so glad to shed it all And now it had come about that I, along with everyone else, would again be hung up in a box by a thread. So that was it for me. Each of us, it seems, is in a little box of illusion, hung up by a thread to the horizon of the cosmos, where the illusion of this three-dimensional world is created. That's exactly what Leonard Susskind says. He even uses it, instead of saying the box system, Susskind talks about the world being voxelated, which is the three-dimensional form of pixelated. And he says reality is actually pixelated in these two-dimensional, the horizon of the cosmos is two-dimensional, and the information is recorded there like a pixel, which is just a square of information, and not three-dimensional. But it creates this illusion of this box system, or an illusion of a voxelated world. So I will read a little bit more here from Jung's recollection, but after that initial encounter with the horizon of the cosmos, for the next 3 weeks he fell into a habit of sleeping until about midnight, then waking up and having these ecstatic experiences where he was communing with all of the archetypes of the collective unconscious mind. The marriage of Zeus and Hera, he mentions he felt as if he was that marriage, and all kinds of archetypal scenarios he enjoyed for the next 3 weeks. And I say enjoyed because he said it was the most blissful experience of his life. Ineffable states of joy, he mentions. I'll read a little bit here from Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Here's the bottom of page 294. He says, all these experiences were glorious. Night after night I floated in a state of purest bliss, thronged round with images of all creation, which is a quote, I forget where, from, he was quoting someone else. Gradually, the motifs mingled and paled. Usually the visions lasted for about an hour. Then I would fall asleep again. By the time morning drew near, I would feel, now gray morning is coming again. Now comes the gray world with its boxes. So that he repeatedly reiterates the idea of the illusion of a box-like three-dimensional universe. And the core parallel is that that illusion is tethered to the horizon by a thread. So you've got all of the essential ingredients of Leonard Suskind's holographic string theory, plus the psychological description of what it's like to be there. So Suskind's theory doesn't assume the horizon of the cosmos is conscious or the central singularity. But what I am saying in the book is that Leonard Suskind's theory is empirically unverified. The fundamental strings are too small to see. So, and yet here we have a near-death experience from Carl Jung and many others that I will get into in subsequent videos that I talk about in the book. Is that empirical evidence? I say it is. I take Jung at his word. I think he's a trustworthy source. What reason would he have to lie? Maybe he's deluding himself, but he's the foremost psychologist of all, in my opinion. So if anyone would be wary for those kinds of psychic tricks we can play on ourselves, it would be Jung. And he had no reason. He was already a world-acclaimed intellectual, so why would he need to make up a story for attention? I just believe what he's saying, and I also believe Leonard Susskind. Therefore, I interpret what Carl Jung experienced as empirical confirmation of Leonard Suskind's string theory, which is what it most desperately needs. And I look at Suskind's string theory as scientific verification of Carl Jung's and other people's near-death experiences, that this is a perfect match. And I want to say a match made in heaven, which is appropriate, considering Jung felt himself to be the marriage of the anima and the animus, the god and the goddess, at specifically the horizon of the cosmos. So then, summarizing all of his experiences, his near-death experience, and then the nightly visions that followed, he said, Carl Jung said, it was not a product of imagination. The visions and experiences were utterly real. There was nothing subjective about them. They all had a quality of absolute objectivity. We shy away from the word eternal, but I can describe the experience only as the ecstasy of a non-temporal state in which the present, past, and future are one. One is interwoven into an indescribable whole, and yet observes it with complete objectivity. So that is the essence of the parallel. Jung experienced himself interwoven with the past, the present, and the future of the entire universe, specifically at the horizon of the cosmos, his own words, and that this artificial three-dimensional world is projected in from that horizon of the cosmos on threads. That's exactly what Leonard Susskind says, and in the book I quote from another part of Suskind's book where he compares this idea. He uses the analogy of Grant's tomb. So the information inside Grant's tomb, he says, is located at the surface area, which is the walls, the ceiling, and the floor. But if you go out there to verify the information is there, it recedes out to the next boundary of space, which would be the atmosphere of Earth. And if you go there, it recedes to the next boundary, which I suppose would be the heliosphere. From there, the halo of the galaxy, and then ultimately the horizon of the cosmos. But going back to the atmosphere of the Earth, Jung was at the outer edge of the Earth's atmosphere, 1,000 miles up in space, he said. That's how high he would have to be in order to observe the continents the way he did. And while he was there, he said he experienced the past, the present, and the future of his own earthly biography, which is just a segment of a much larger biography, including past and future lives, which he said he would learn about inside the black hole. But this idea of information conservation at every two-dimensional volume of space brings up a more ancient concept, the anima mundi, or the soul of the Earth. If all of the information of the Earth is located at the two-dimensional surface area, that indicates the past, the present, and the future of Earth are located at each point of the outermost edge of the Earth's atmosphere. And that seems to be what Jung experienced, which also seems related to the way the primal form of his doctor rose above the Earth and said he had been delegated by the Earth to bring Jung back. So this was a very Earth personified with Jung's biography, his desire to learn about the infinite past and future at the horizon of the cosmos and stay there, but he had to come back to this box system, which seemed like a prison to him, which is a lot like Plato's Republic, as we've discussed in previous videos. So is the idea of the thread of destiny in the near-death experience of Plato's Republic at the end of the Republic, the myth of So many similarities between Plato and Jung. Jung himself said his theory of archetypes of the collective unconscious is a restatement of Plato's theory of the absolute ideas imprinted on the soul. All right, so I want to talk about one last part of Jung's near-death experience, and that is not the synchronicity, but the idea of 444. So after Carl Jung's doctor came up and said that the Earth had delegated him to bring him back, he had no right to leave, then Jung came back into his body, which he found to be this horrible prison system, and then he slowly recuperated. But when he got out of his sick bed, his doctor actually entered his sick bed from which he would never get up. He died after that. And it was on April 4th, 1944. So Jung mentions that. So I'll just read a little bit here from the book. However, it seemed to Jung that the price which had to be paid for that delegated message was the mortal life of Dr. H., who took to his deathbed, Jung noticed, on the very day Jung rose from his, April 4, 1944. So why does that 4444 seem symbolically significant to Jung? He says, because the necessary statement of the number 4, therefore, is that, among other things, it is an apex and simultaneously the end of a preceding ascent. We'll get into Jung's theories about the symbolic meaning of numbers, especially 1 through 4. But again, that 4444 and Jung's doctor died, got on his deathbed the day Jung rose from his, it just lends to the gravity of the situation he was dealing with. This earth seemed to be personally involved with Jung's recuperation. And again, I'll just say my speculation is because a year later, the nuclear war era began, and all kinds of environmental catastrophes the potential for them has been accumulating ever since then. And I believe that seeing the parallels between Jung's psychology, and especially his near-death experience, and Leonard Suskind's holographic string theory is the antidote humans need in order to reform our way of dealing with each other and the cosmos as a whole and planet Earth.